The majority of violent fantasizers never act. What makes the ones who do cross over? The daydreamer steps out of his trance and into a stranger's house.
It's the fall of 1977. Sacramento, California is under siege. A violent serial rapist on the prowl.
Control was this offender's chosen language. It was in the bindings, the blitz attacks. He ruled in the houses he sneaked into. A static mask imposing horror.
Tuesday, October 5th, 1976. It was about 6:30 in the morning. My husband had just left for work. My 3-year-old son hopped in bed with me for a snuggle. Within 1 to 2 minutes, I saw a flashlight shining down the hall, and I screamed out to my husband, "What have you forgotten?" Next thing I knew, I looked up, and there was a man shining this flashlight in my eyes with a ski mask on, holding a large butcher knife. He told us with clenched teeth, "Shut up, or I'll kill you."
She would soon become victim number 5. But before that terrifying morning, she was simply Jane Carson, a 30-year-old nursing student at Cal State Sacramento, living with her Air Force pilot husband and their young son in the suburb of Citrus Heights.
Life was very good back then. Just a normal routine, getting up in the morning, taking my son to daycare, then I would go to school, come home, fix dinner.
For Jane, her once secure home would soon become her prison.
The next thing is he gags us, blindfolds us, he ties us up with shoelaces. He started ripping sheets or towels, I'm not sure. But it was very methodical and it was very slow.
That tearing sound, he's doing that purposefully because he knows the victims can hear that.
He wanted to inflict absolute fear and suffering in these victims.
And that was his primary goal.
His next move was to move my son. But this is where the fear really took place. My heart was pounding through my chest. And I just prayed, "Dear Lord, please, please let my son be safe." And he came around and he untied my ankles. I wasn't paying attention to the rape. I was paying attention to what had he done with my son.
After the assault, her son is put back in bed with her.
I could feel his body, and then I was relieved. And then he said, "Don't move, or I'll come back and kill you." Then he goes into the kitchen, and he starts rattling pots and pans. It's like he's cooking something. And I went, wow, this is really off the wall.
When her attacker finally leaves, the sun is rising. Jane and her little boy still bound in bed. Then she breaks free.
And when I got my blindfold down, would you believe that my 3-year-old was asleep? That was God's protection for that child.
Carol Daly, a detective with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, was one of the first on scene.
By the time our patrol officer got in the area and started looking for him, he was nowhere around.
There had been 4 similar attacks in Sacramento in recent months.
At what point did you realize you had a serial rapist on your hands?
With Jane Carson, when we looked back and realized she was number 5 of similar rapes.
After Jane's attack, there are 3 more rapes just that month.
People in these quiet East Bay suburbs have wondered and worried. Wondered about why the police can't catch the rapist and worried about their own homes being violated.
Locks were flying off the hardware shelves.
I don't like it. It's getting too close to home. I put locks on my doors, peepholes in just last week.
Gun sales soared.
They just want to protect themselves and protect their families.
Every day in the newspaper, it was number 8, it was number 10, it was number 15, 20, 28, 30. You know, it just kept going on and on and on.
This map of the area showed the rapist's brazen ability to strike wherever and whenever he wanted.
The only thing we really know about the East Area rapist is that he's a pro. He's been at this for 4 years now, and still nobody even knows what he looks like.
We felt that our next call was going to be to a homicide. We really felt he was ready to kill.
Suddenly, the spree of sex assaults stopped abruptly in 1979 with no rhyme or reason. What investigators didn't know was their biggest fear had come true. The rapist re-emerging in Southern California, now a killer. 10 murders in succession, earning him the nickname Original Night Stalker. The initial attacks are on women, home alone or with their children. But then, the East Area rapist shifts his target to couples.
And it tells me that this guy has the self-confidence in his abilities to be able to go into a house with the threat of this male present and take control.
One of the town meetings addresses the new development.
A man stood up and said, "I don't believe somebody could be raped if a man was in the house."
What happened to him?
Well, several months later, he and his wife were victims of the East Area rapist.
It's chilling to think that this guy said, "Oh yeah, really? You think you can protect your wife?" And then he attacked them.
Prominent attorney Lyman Smith and his wife Charlene.
They had been bludgeoned in the head with a log that had been collected from a wood pile outside the house. Charlene's body was processed for sexual assault evidence, and semen was found.
Police preserved that semen sample from Charlene Smith's rape kit. It would take 17 years to match the killer's DNA to the DNA collected at 3 other murder scenes.
So they worked them independently for many, many, many years. It wasn't until the advent of DNA technology in the mid-90s that they were able to link a crime.
Then, 4 years later, in a stunning development, authorities are finally able to connect the original Night Stalker to the East Area Rapist.
Your serial rapist in Northern California was the same serial killer they were dealing with in Southern California. How significant was that development?
Holy smokes, this is like the big break.
For nearly 2 decades, the Golden State Killer, also known as the original Night Stalker and East Area Rapist, terrorized California residents.
This guy was a menace. He was striking time and time again. The fact that they couldn't catch this guy just ignited the city in fear.
Did the victims give a description that was unique about him?
Most of the victims described him as having a very small penis.
Some said he had a strange smell.
Detective Carol Daly says they thoroughly checked out all leads.
There was not a stone left unturned in trying to identify this rapist, and we didn't have any luck there.
The FBI describes the Golden State Killer as a white male, close to 6 feet, who had blonde or light brown hair at the height of his crime spree. Today, he is between the ages of 60 and 75, and still, authorities believe, alive.
Police say they now have the Golden State Killer in custody.
And they used DNA testing to find him.
Absolute shock in this quiet community that the man who terrorized California may have been living right here. The Golden State Killer vanished in the 80s, gone for decades, until investigators say a key piece of DNA evidence connected the dots just days ago.
We found the needle in the haystack, and it was right here in Sacramento.
72-year-old Joseph James DeAngelo is the elusive Golden State Killer, the former police officer allegedly responsible for at least 12 murders, upwards of 50 rapes, and more than 100 burglaries in California from 1976 to 1986. DeAngelo's name never coming up in prior investigations, but just 6 days ago, a critical clue.
We started some surveillance. We were able to get some discarded DNA, and we were able to confirm that we had our man.
DeAngelo seemingly hiding in plain sight. Police surprising him and taking him into custody on Tuesday as he was leaving his home.
And charges against DeAngelo continue to pile up. Prosecutors believe that key piece of DNA evidence will link him to perhaps dozens of crimes spanning 10 counties. They're promising more charges in the coming days.
Authorities say he worked as an officer at 2 different police departments until he was reportedly fired in 1979 for shoplifting dog repellent and a hammer.
Very possibly he was committing the crimes during the time he was employed as a peace officer.
Also known as the original Night Stalker and East Area Rapist, the killer taunted police and his victims with phone calls long after the attacks. Leaving the entire state on edge. A significant development came in the mid-90s. DNA testing connecting the puzzle pieces to one unknown person.
Investigators used publicly shared DNA data to track down the suspected Golden State Killer decades after his crime spree. 72-year-old James DeAngelo appeared in court Friday.
Joseph DeAngelo was arraigned on charges for 2 murders in 1978. He was barely audible answering the judge. Investigators found DeAngelo using DNA from crime scenes decades ago, which they submitted to a publicly shared genealogy website called GEDmatch. GEDmatch users submit DNA profiles they buy from sites like Ancestry.com and 23andMe. They plug that for free into GEDmatch, searching for distant relatives. Within days, investigators found distant cousins of the suspected Golden State Killer.
We literally went back to the great-great-great-grandfather with individuals that were born in the early part of the 1800s.
It took 4 months to identify DeAngelo as a likely suspect, but to prove it, investigators followed him to collect his DNA from something he threw away.
It could be he left a tissue. It could be that he, put his hands on a door handle, but it was what I call abandoned DNA.
That abandoned DNA solved a 44-year-old mystery in 4 months, but also raises concerns about the privacy of DNA collection. GEDmatch says law enforcement never approached them. In a statement, GEDmatch tells users, if you are concerned about non-genealogical uses of your DNA, you should not upload your DNA to the database.
For people who have used Ancestry.com or 23andMe, do we think law enforcement would have been able to dig through those databases the same way?
We do not. Ancestry.com and 23andMe have much more stringent privacy protections when it comes to legal enforcement and subpoenas, as well as search warrants. The open source website was essentially a Wikipedia of shared DNA and genealogy information among people who already had their DNA analyzed by one of these bigger companies, downloaded the raw data, and then uploaded it to a separate site.
So law enforcement brings a search warrant to Ancestry.com and they say, no, sorry, we won't give you the info?
If it is a valid search warrant that complies with the requirements of Ancestry.com, they will honor the search warrant. 23andMe has a similar policy. They state that they will strenuously refuse any search warrant requests, but ultimately, if they're legally compelled to comply, they will be required to turn over user data. They use the information from the crime scene, and they took the raw data and uploaded it to this open source website and used portions of the information to match it to other individuals, a so-called family match. And through that, they were able to assemble a sort of a family tree of suspects and then individually pursue those portions of the family tree that they thought were the most likely. They were looking for a male. They knew that from the DNA evidence. And then they were looking for somebody who lived in the particular geographic area where the crimes were committed. So from that, they identified a main suspect, and then they followed this individual, and they were able to recover some of his personal DNA. You touch your hand on a door, you get your hair cut, you sneeze and throw it away in a public garbage can. There are any number of ways that they could have acquired what is abandoned DNA from the suspect and then matched it up to the DNA from the crime scene.
So this is an important point. You don't necessarily have to take a DNA test yourself. If your brother or your mom or maybe even your cousin took it, it could be enough to learn something about you.
But realistically, the problem is that even if you protect your private information, it may be one of your family members that gives away your private information, or possibly if you've taken one of these DNA test kits, you may have already given away the privacy of your great-great-grandchildren.
Wow.
For the 51 ladies who were brutally raped in this crime scene, sleep better tonight. He isn't coming through the window. He's now in jail, and he's history.
DeAngelo's arrest bringing relief to victims and their family.